This video is made possible through the generosity of a servant of H-shem who wishes to remain anonymous, who sends us his blessings to continue producing videos that spread the truth of Torah. May Almighty God shower him with abundant blessings and with success in all his endeavors. If you would like to partner with us or sponsor a video, please drop us an email at torahprophecies@gmail.com or look in the description of this video for more details. It was suggested to me to mention that even though I never suggest or encourage in any shape or form any expression of violence against our theological opponents, to the contrary, I stress repeatedly that the way of God in our Torah is through compassion and understanding, even to those who are temporarily engulfed in darkness. As King Solomon declares in the book of Proverbs, chapter 3, the ways of Torah are pleasant and peaceful. However, if I should ever be deplatformed from YouTube, please look for me on Rumble. I received many emails and comments with questions regarding the outcome of the November presidential elections, an outcome we did not anticipate. I stated several times in previous videos that I was 99% sure it would turn out differently. You do not have to be as wise as King Solomon or even Sherlock Holmes to conclude that Biden did not win this race honestly and legally. Every poll concluded that almost half of Americans are not convinced that Biden was the legitimate winner of these elections. This includes a very significant number of independents and even registered Democrats. What do you think it feels like to know deep in your heart that half of the country does not really consider you their legitimate president? If the election results were indeed kosher, why wouldn't Biden or one single Democrat politician or any member of the massive army of mindless allies in big tech, big media, the entertainment industry, or academia agree that it would be wise to have a serious and transparent investigation into all the claims presented by Trump's team? Why would they simply repeat like a broken record over and over the mantra that all claims are baseless? Why are they baseless? Because they say so? Because the election officials claimed that they were baseless? Because Dominion claims they were baseless? Because the very people who are being accused of conspiring to steal the election say so? Why wouldn't anybody on the left suggest that we sit down with over 1,000 American citizens who presented sworn affidavits attesting that they witnessed serious issues with this election? Why not question them and cross-examine them in a public and transparent trial to see if there is any validity to their claims? Why did they all wage a massive campaign to tar and feather anybody who even suggested that there was anything to investigate? What exactly were they so afraid of? Why did Joe Biden make the absurd and ludicrous claim that anybody who suggested that the election might not have been 100% clean can be compared to Joe Goebbels? What a retarded and disgusting comparison. It is beyond obvious that they were terrified that the truth might emerge if any of these claims were seriously investigated. This observation is more than a red flag. It is a smoking gun. All the confused talking heads on the left stated how deeply offensive it is to even suggest that our election process is not 100% honest. The reverse is actually true. It is deeply offensive to the left, who have been claiming for the last 4 years that Donald Trump is an evil maniac who is dangerous to America and to the world, and that everything must be done to remove him from power. And if this is so, what would be the moral justification not to engage in election fraud and manipulation to remove such a dangerous person? Would anybody in their right mind say that it would be morally objectionable to falsify an election to ensure that the likes of Hitler should not be in power? Isn't that their justification for concocting the Russian collusion hoax and for trying to impeach him the first time for making a perfectly normal phone call, and now a second time for doing absolutely nothing? The fact that it is illegal to falsify an election means nothing to the left. They encourage illegal activity when it fits their retarded moral perspective. That's why they encourage illegal immigration, and that's why they encouraged tens of thousands of rioters to illegally destroy $2 billion worth of property, thousands of people's livelihood, illegally damage almost 200 federal buildings, illegally attack and seriously wound many hundreds of law enforcement personnel, and illegally murder over 20 people. Compared to all that, the illegality of stealing an election is a joke. And it is deeply offensive even to suggest that these paradigms of virtue would not have engaged in this type of activity. I was deeply disappointed at some very bright conservative commentators like Ben Shapiro and Andrew Klavan, who swallowed the false narrative of the left hook, line, and sinker. They suggested that Trump should have conceded after all his claims were thrown out of court. No, guys, he definitely should not have conceded, because not one of them were thrown out because they were seriously investigated and found to be baseless. They were thrown out because the courts did not want to deal with them. What would have been the big deal to engage 2 or 3 independent, reputable cybersecurity companies to conduct a forensic audit on all the machines in the swing states and present their conclusions to the public? Had Biden suggested that this be done, he would have gained the support of tens of millions of Americans who are now unsure if he is their legitimate president. I am also quite certain that Trump had the legal authority to bring in military intelligence agencies to conduct a serious audit of the elections and conduct public and transparent interrogations of all those who signed sworn affidavits attesting to a host of serious issues surrounding this election. I know this to be so because otherwise why did all 10 living former defense secretaries publish an op-ed in the Washington Post on January 3rd, warning the president that involving the military in election disputes would cross into dangerous territory? What were they so afraid of if he didn't have the authority to do so? And what would be so dangerous if they actually got to the bottom of this and proved once and for all that the election was conducted honestly? A conclusion which would bring much healing and unity to our divided country. What exactly is so dangerous about that? Trump obviously had no intention of taking over the country through the military. He simply would have engaged the highly professional, sophisticated, and apolitical investigative arms of the military to figure out what actually transpired during the election. I am not sure exactly what happened. Maybe he still has something up his sleeve, or maybe Trump was demoralized and disoriented by the relative handful of stupid idiots who stormed the Capitol on January 6th. This may have caused him to lose the courage to stand up for what he felt was a legitimate demand for a comprehensive investigation into all the claims against the cleanliness of this election. The thunderous and highly exaggerated condemnation which came from both the left and the right may have caught him off guard and caused him to lose his footing. Or like I said, he may have something up his sleeve. In truth, I am still hoping that the truth will come out and Donald Trump, who won this election, if the fraudulent and illegal votes are discounted, will return to the White House. But regardless, in this video I want to share with you my thought process. In the next video I will share with you what is the reason that, at least at present, Biden is sitting in the Oval Office. I actually have very good news for you, so please stay tuned to my next video. For now, I would like to begin with an email which I received from a listener who is also a scholar. Dear Rabbi Weisberg, I listened to all your videos with interest, and my question to you is as follows. I would generally divide your interpretations of prophecies into 2 distinct categories. Some of your interpretations are extremely convincing. You seem to have hit the nail on its head. Among these I would count your deciphering of the enigmatic end times in the book of Daniel and the reconciliation of the progeny of Yishmael and Esav at the end of days. The other category includes interpretations which are creative, but not at all definitive, not by any stretch of the imagination. I am referring to a series of interpretations which you strung together to predict with 99% certainty that President Trump will emerge the winner of the 2020 presidential elections. You kept on repeating this prediction even as it became more and more obvious that his team was not succeeding in convincing any court to accept their claims. You based the prediction on the following premises. Number 1, there is a clear Talmudic prophecy that Persia will fall to the hands of Edom at the end of days. Translated into modern terms, this means that Iran will be crushed through the hands of the United States. You reasoned that since Trump was very tough on Iran, whereas Biden is determined to re-engage in some kind of deal and pick up where Obama left off, it is thus reasonable to assume that Trump will be given a second term to completely eradicate Iran's nuclear capabilities. This argument is reasonable, but in no way compelling. If Iran is on the verge of producing a nuclear weapon, it is not inconceivable that regardless of the weak and pacifist orientation of a Biden administration, God will force America to take action. It is also not inconceivable that either Trump or another strong Republican figure like Ted Cruz or Mike Pompeo or somebody else will retake the presidency in 2024 and crush Iran's nuclear capabilities before the 2027 deadline. Another possibility is that Israel may take out Iran's nuclear capabilities. Although Israel is controlled by Jews, its government is not Torah-based, but patterned after Western democracies. Before the Messiah comes, Israel could be considered part of Western civilization and thus connected to Edom. In addition, Israel receives an enormous amount of military aid and equipment from the US, so their military actions could be considered linked. And finally, your assumption that the only one who can fulfill the prophecy that the last leader of Edom will participate in the rebuilding of the Third Holy Temple in Jerusalem is Donald J. Trump is obviously baseless. This prophecy as well can be fulfilled after 2024 through another good leader of America, or if God wants, even through Joe Biden. Based on the above, your interpretations never had more than a 50-50 chance of being correct. So on what basis did you insist, with a 99% probability, that Trump would remain in the White House up until January 20th? These are excellent questions. In order to properly explain my thought process, I need to elaborate a bit on the tools we have to assess reality and to make assumptions about the future. The most profound and comprehensive treatment on how Judaism understands human consciousness is detailed in a book called Tanya, which was written by Rabbi Schneur Zalman and published in 1797. Rabbi Schneur Zalman founded the Chabad School of Mysticism and Meditation. The Tanya is a fascinating work which synthesizes all authentic Jewish sources published up until that time, Talmudic, philosophic as well as mystical. The Tanya explains that human consciousness as well as our decision-making process is fed by two distinct sources of input: the human self and the divine self. The human self processes reality in terms of how it relates to its selfish and self-centered needs and desires. The divine self perceives reality on a much deeper, divine, and objective level. The human self and the divine self are constantly vying for control over the conscious mind, which will issue a verdict on how the body it controls will act. The mind needs motivation to call the body into action. The motivation comes either from the human self or the divine self. The default motivator is the human self. It takes a lot of effort to activate the divine self, and even when it is activated, it faces a tough battle to overcome the human self, and it usually requires God's intervention to succeed. In Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 13, King Solomon calls the human self Melech Zokein Uksil, the old and foolish king. Our sages explain that he is old because he is there controlling your mind from the day you are born until the day you die. He is a king because he usually calls the shots, and he is foolish because he actually believes in the nonsense he feeds your consciousness. The consciousness in most people is pre-programmed to look out for their well-being, success, and happiness. And for most people, that includes leading a meaningful life, which by default means getting married and having children, so that one can be devoted to others, not just to themselves. It also includes the need to contribute to society. Of course, there are quite a number of psychopaths and others who for some reason or other were born with or who acquired unhealthy or sick personalities which lack these basic motivations. Rabbi Schneur Zalman explains that in many people the human self is not only selfish in the sense that it cares more about itself than others, but even more so. It is often bothered by other people's success and happiness to the extent that it wants to take it away from them. It gets even worse. For some people, the human selfish self cannot even tolerate the existence of others that in any way impinges on their own self-importance. Rabbi Schneur Zalman uses the term nefesh habahamis, the animal self, not the term human self that I sometimes use. I do that because the comparison to animals only applies to good people whose human self is animalistic in the sense that it is selfish and self-centered. But many human beings are much worse than animals. Animals are not bothered by the existence of other animals that pose no threat to them. And animals don't kill or inflict harm just for the sake of satisfying their need for domination and self-worth. So I feel it is not so appropriate to call these base human traits the product of an animalistic soul, as this is an insult to animals, so I interchange it sometimes with the term human self. Many great thinkers have struggled to understand the mind of a lefty. There's a great book by Jonathan Haidt called The Righteous Mind, where he delves into the minds of conservatives and liberals. But I'm not referring to liberals, who are actually very distinct from lefties, as Dennis Prager always points out. It's the mind of a lefty that has so many thinkers perplexed. Some of the books I read include Still the Best Hope from Dennis Prager, The Death of Right and Wrong from Tammy Bruce, Unholy Alliance, Radical Islam and the American Left from David Horowitz, Dark Agenda, The War to Destroy Christian America from David Horowitz, and last, from my friend Jamie Glazov, United in Hate, The Left's Romance with Tyranny and Terror. These books document in frightening detail the left's involvement, collaboration, and collusion with the most vile and evil people, movements, and groups. But they fail to show a convincing grip on what actually motivates the left to pursue such opposing objectives. Lefties display such care and compassion for criminals and terrorists, but they despise their victims. They feel compelled to defend illegal immigrants even if they are criminals, with total disregard to the harm this causes so many law-abiding citizens. They feel such pain when a white policeman is rough on a black criminal, but when a black person murders another black person, which occurs hundreds of times more often every single year, they simply yawn and go back to sleep. Tens of thousands of violent hoodlums marching for BLM can destroy the livelihood of thousands of law-abiding citizens, including many blacks. They can injure thousands and murder over 20, and the left only cheers them on. But they are outraged beyond control when someone on the right says something that can, in some way, be misconstrued in a way that it may be understood as condescending or disrespectful to males who want access to women's bathrooms. And they will not hesitate for a second to destroy the life and livelihood of this person who allegedly said something they do not like. If it is truly compassion that motivates them to be so sensitive to the feelings of criminals, terrorists, and confused individuals who feel they can change their gender every other day, why have they no compassion and even relished the opportunity to destroy a person's life and consign his wife and children to a life of poverty just because this person who they are targeting was under no fault of his own unenlightened to the truths of leftism? Are these people malevolent hypocrites, or are they simply insane? According to Reb Schneur Zalman, the answer is neither. Most of these people are not psychopaths. They actually have a healthy conscience, which, as mentioned, is pre-programmed to strive for a life of meaning and to contribute in a positive way to society. But they also have a very powerful animalistic soul that is extremely selfish and power-hungry, and does not even tolerate the existence of others that in any way impinge on their sense of importance and superiority. The animalistic soul wants to take control of the body, but the conscious will not allow it to do things which are inherently evil. Because, as mentioned, the mind is pre-programmed to lead a good and meaningful life. So the animalistic soul has to convince the consciousness that these acts that it wants the body to perpetrate are actually totally moral. That is why the lefty morons of PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, compare the painless slaughtering of chickens to provide nutrition for human beings to the Holocaust. And that is why in July 2014, they lodged a complaint against Hamas for using a donkey to carry a bomb to be used to blow up Jewish men, women, and children. The lives of the Jews meant nothing to them because the Jewish government of the State of Israel oppresses the Palestinians. So therefore, no Jew in the world has a right to live. But somehow, they lost many nights of sleep over the fact that a donkey's life was lost in the process of murdering Jews. And that is why the members of PETA, who exemplify the morality of the left, gleefully celebrated the verdict handed down by a psychopathic judge to have a kind and charitable Hasidic Jew locked up for life for the sin of operating a successful and compassionate meat processing plant. That is also why the Nazis passed extensive animal protection laws while the Holocaust was going on. And that is why for so many centuries, the bad Christians of old could not simply murder Jews because they hated them. They needed to have a moral justification, which the serpent in their hearts had no difficulty concocting. We killed God's Son. And we murder a Christian child every year before Passover to mix its blood in our matzah. Never mind that these lunatic accusations are completely incoherent. How could God be murdered? And wasn't the whole purpose of Jesus' birth so that he should be murdered to atone for the original sin? So why should the people who facilitated his very purpose be punished for doing just that? And doesn't the Bible explicitly say in Deuteronomy chapter 24 that children are not punished for the sins of their ancestors? So why do we need atonement for the sin of Adam and Eve? And what is a justification of holding all Jews accountable for all generations for something that was allegedly done by a small group of them 1,000 years ago? And how could we put blood in our food when it is explicitly forbidden in the strongest terms 4 times in the Torah to consume any blood? But that is the awesome power God gave the serpent, to convince the consciousness to do the most ridiculous and evil things in the name of morality. And that is why the genius currently sitting in the Oval Office compared Trump's desire to investigate the integrity of this election to the lies of Joseph Goebbels. He cannot admit that his desire to do everything possible to destroy Donald Trump, even after he succeeded in stealing the election from him, is based on pure meanness and maliciousness against somebody who he loathes and despises. It is very hard to square that with his insistence that he is a devout Catholic. He needs to convince himself that he is morally obligated to do so. But as the saying goes, you can fool yourself all of the time. You can fool all of the people some of the time, and some of the people all of the time, but you cannot fool all of the people all of the time. The arguments advanced by the selfish souls of the left to their conscious mind are incredibly stupid and completely incoherent. Nonetheless, the animal soul, being a descendant of the primordial serpent, is extremely cunning. If he could convince one of the most perfect human beings who ever existed, Adam's wife Eve, who was carefully crafted by the hands of God, then surely he can convince simple people like you and I to do the stupidest things in the name of morality. The serpent didn't say, eat from the fruit, because who cares about God and his commandments? The serpent insisted that there was a moral imperative to be like God and understand the difference between good and evil, and only by eating this fruit will you accomplish this goal. It sounds so stupid, but how many times have we fallen into the same trap? On the other hand, there are times when we act irrationally, and it is actually coming from the godly soul. Like when a person sees a stranger drowning in turbulent waters and jumps in to save them. There is no rational reason to risk your life to save a total stranger. And if you have a wife and children who rely on you, the rational mind could argue that risking your life for a total stranger is actually immoral. Nonetheless, we all realize that acts such as these are the epitome of goodness and godliness. These two types of behaviors are referred to as holy stupidity and unholy stupidity, or as irrational behavior that is inferior to common sense and irrational behavior which is superior to common sense. Now let's move on. The ultimate purpose of creation is for God's presence to be manifest in our finite and physical world so that mankind could have a deep and loving relationship with him. The beginning of that process began with the building of the temple in Jerusalem, in which God's presence would be manifest in its inner sanctum, the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Before the Holy Temple was built in Jerusalem by King Solomon 2,848 years ago, it went through several preliminary stages. The first was the portable temple. The Jews were instructed to build in the desert shortly after they received the Torah at Sinai. It was called the Mishkan, and every detail of its construction, as well as the materials to be used, is recorded in the book of Exodus. The main structure of the portable temple was composed of beams. A beam is a keresh in Hebrew. They were made from acacia wood, atzei shittim in Hebrew. The Kabbalists explain the significance of these words. Keresh, a beam, has the same letters as the word sheker, falsehood. Shittim, acacia, has the same root as the word shote, a fool, or shtus, foolishness, irrational behavior. The world could be a very dark and confusing place in which the reality of God is not readily apparent unless you look for him. In fact, the Hebrew word for the word olam, world, is related to the word he'alam, concealment, because it hides the truth. In ancient times, people believed that the pagan gods created the world and were running the world. In modern times, people believe that the world was created on its own and runs on its own. Both belief systems are equally false and actually stupid, but these beliefs took hold because God's presence is concealed. The purpose of the Holy Temple was to radiate the light of truth and the awareness of God's continuous involvement in every aspect of the natural universe and every aspect of our lives. The temple, constructed of beams, keresh, is meant to transform the falsehood, the sheker, of this world, and to rearrange the letters of the word keresh so that it spells kesher, which means connection. And then the keresh will act like a pillar that connects a ceiling to a floor, symbolizing our connection with the one above. And this is accomplished through atzei shittim, irrational behavior. Let me explain. The Talmud in Tractate Shabbos, page 28, relates that a certain heretic was once observing the Talmudic sage Rava, one of the leading Talmudic sages who flourished in Babylon in the middle of the 4th century. Rava was so deeply involved in his studies that he wasn't aware that he was sitting on his hand and blood was oozing all over the place. The heretic approached him and said, and I am paraphrasing, "You people are crazy, and you have demonstrated this from day one. God approached you at Sinai and asked if you will accept upon yourself to keep the laws of his Torah. Any rational person would have responded that before any commitments can be made, one needs to see exactly what they are being asked to commit to. But you people answered immediately, Na'aseh v'nishma. We commit ourselves to doing whatever you, God, will tell us," which was a totally irrational response. The irrational nature of Judaism actually began much earlier. We are introduced to Abraham, the father of our nation, in Genesis chapter 12. God said to Abraham, "Go away from your land, from your birthplace, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you great. You shall become a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and he who curses you I will curse. All the families of the earth will be blessed through you." The Torah says that Abraham was 75 years old at the time. What was Abraham doing for 75 years, which earned him what is arguably the most important nomination in the history of mankind, to be the father of God's chosen people? The Bible is silent on this, but our oral tradition describes Abraham as a man with an insatiable desire to discover the truth and a brilliant, inquisitive mind who discovered through the power of reason that the world must have been created and is animated by an infinite, omniscient, and omnipotent God. But Abraham did not stop there. He was determined to share the truth with as many people as he could. With incredible courage and self-sacrifice, he stood up against all the pagan elites of his time and succeeded in inspiring a following of tens of thousands. But why is there not one word in the Bible describing the incredible life of Abraham up until the time God introduced himself to him at the age of 75? Why is there not one word explaining why God chose him over anybody else to father a nation who will be entrusted to bring the truth of God to mankind? The masters of Jewish mysticism explain that the Bible is the story of the Jews, and the story of the Jews is not a rational one. Abraham was a man with a uniquely rational mind who easily tore apart all the silly arguments presented by the pagan priests of his day. He was also a man of incredible idealism and courage, who put his life on the line to spread the truth that he discovered. But none of this has to do with being a Jew, which requires the suspension of the rational mind to embrace the super-rational. And that is why the Torah does not tell us anything about the amazing life of Abraham until he was chosen by God to be the father of our people. Because all of his phenomenal accomplishments were human accomplishments. God's call to Abraham was an invitation to enter into a relationship which was superhuman and super-rational. When he was told, in the beginning of Genesis chapter 12, to leave the land of his birth and go to the Holy Land, he was also being told metaphorically to leave all his human accomplishments behind, because now he was on a new trajectory. The tests which he was to endure would require superhuman devotion. Abraham fought his whole life against the cruel practices of the pagan nations surrounding him. And then God asks him to sacrifice his own son. This was completely irrational, and he should have protested. It was not like Abraham was afraid to challenge God when he felt God was not being reasonable and fair. He challenged him when God told him he was about to destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. In Genesis chapter 18 it says that Abraham came forward and said to God, "Will you actually wipe out the innocent together with the guilty? Suppose there are 50 innocent people in the city, would you still destroy it too and not spare the place for the sake of 50 good people inside it? It would be sacrilege even to ascribe such an act to you, to kill innocent with guilty, letting the righteous and the wicked fare alike. It would be sacrilege to ascribe this to you. Shall the whole world's judge not act justly?" But he did not challenge God when he was asked at the age of 136 to sacrifice his son Isaac. That request was completely irrational. Abraham should have protested. "All my life I fought for you. I put my life on the line to ridicule and denounce all the nations around me. How in the world can you believe in a God that is so cruel, that demands that you sacrifice your children to him? I built up a following of tens of thousands, and now my entire life's work will go down the drain. There will be nobody who believes in you anymore. Moreover, you promised me I will have a child from my soulmate Sarah, who will continue my work on your behalf. We were miraculously gifted a child in our old age. I was 100 years old. My wife Sarah was 90. He was to be our legacy. He was to follow in our footsteps and continue to lead the large group of ethical monotheists which Sarah and I worked so hard to build for the past 100 years. And now you want me to sacrifice him? Shall the whole world's judge not act justly?" Of course, this was only a test. God had absolutely no intention for Abraham to carry it out. But still, why did he not protest when he thought God was serious about this request? It is because Abraham had a relationship with God that was beyond human comprehension. There was no place for questions in this relationship. Only absolute devotion. Abraham passed on his spiritual genes to his progeny, the Jewish people. And God promised us that we will survive against all odds and beyond the laws of nature and logic if we will devote ourselves to Him above and beyond the dictates of our rational mind. Now is not the time to go through our long history and detail all the times we stood up to the plate as individuals and as people. I will mention only the events surrounding the holiday of Purim, which we will be celebrating in 24 days. It happened 2,378 years ago. The wicked Haman, the Amalekite, schemed to annihilate all the Jews, men, women, and children, throughout the entire Persian Empire, which basically controlled most of the civilized world. And this would spell the end of the Jewish people. He manipulated the king of Persia, who was, as I mentioned in a previous video, probably Cambyses, son of Cyrus, to consent to his nefarious plot. The decree only included Jews who practiced Judaism. Those who would convert to the religion of the Persians would be spared. The Persians believed in a form of worship that is today called Zoroastrianism. It was a dualistic theology that proposed a god of light and a god of darkness who are in constant struggle against one another. It was actually a major upgrade from paganism, and it has a lot in common with Judaism. For example, they believed in some form of a Messiah. They believed in judgment after death, and they believed in free will. They believed that people should be good for the sake of goodness and not for the sake of being rewarded in heaven. They believed that people should not only engage in good deeds, but also good thoughts and good words. It promoted living a charitable life, etc., etc. Their temples always had fires, but they didn't actually worship the fire, but rather believed that it was symbolic of the good God who was the source of light and warmth. Judaism categorically rejects the notion that there is any independent existence other than God. There is no Satan or God of darkness. Darkness is caused by God hiding his light, but not his very being. However, from a rational point of view, there are many arguments one can present that would have allowed the Jews to temporarily and only externally adopt the religion of the Persians to save themselves from complete annihilation. Since there is actually no idol worship involved in Zoroastrianism. However, we have no record of even one single Jew taking that option. They all willingly submitted themselves to annihilation rather than to submit to Haman. Note that the Jews did not know that Esther the Jewess was the queen, and in their mind there was no natural way for them to escape the imminent Holocaust other than to convert to the dominant religion of the Persians. The Jews were taking an extremely irrational position. And you recall from the book of Esther that Esther was not sure that the king would want to see her, since he did not summon for her for 30 days. Approaching the king without being summoned was punishable by death, even for his wife. And the king had a history of killing wives that were disrespectful to him, as he did to her predecessor, Vashti. Before she approached the king, she dressed in her beautiful royal garments in order to find favor in his eyes. But as preparation to her encounter, she did something extremely irrational. She fasted for 3 days and 3 nights, something which does not do much to enhance one's charm and beauty. Why did she behave so irrationally? Because she knew that although we are supposed to do our part to protect ourselves from harm, ultimately it is God who protects us, and therefore it was more important for her to spend 3 days in fasting and prayer and connecting to God than to focus on enhancing her beauty so that the king would be sympathetic to her. Returning now to the questions I presented at the beginning of this video. Why was I so optimistic, to the point where I was 99% sure that somehow God will keep President Trump in the White House, even as it seemed less and less likely that his team would have any success through the courts, including the Supreme Court, as well as the state legislatures? And the answer is that one of the 613 mitzvahs, the directives that God asks of every Jew, is the mitzvah of bitachon. Bitachon means trust in God that he will take care of us, even when things don't seem that they are going in that direction. Now, some contemporary Jewish thinkers suggested that this mitzvah does not require us to trust that God will do things that are pleasing to us, God may choose to do something which is painful or challenging, and the mitzvah is to trust that whatever God does do, regardless of whether we see the goodness in it, we must trust that he knows what he is doing, and ultimately it is for our benefit. However, the most authoritative Jewish book on Jewish ethics is called Chayvis Halavavis, Duties of the Heart. It was written around the year 1080 by Rabbi Bachya ibn Pekuda, who lived in Spain. Till this very day, it is widely studied and remains the most authoritative text on these topics. It was authored in Arabic and translated into Hebrew. There are English translations published by Jason Aronson, and that's the one that I have right here. And there's another translation published by Feldheim Publishers. The Chayvis Halvavis states clearly in the fourth section titled The Gate of Trust in God that this mitzvah requires us to trust that God will do things that we perceive as good, not only things that he perceives as good. This position has clearly been adopted by the great Hasidic masters. Now, this obligation to trust God would seem to be completely irrational, because we know that many times people do suffer. As a nation, we have seen more suffering than any other nation in recorded history. And the concept of suffering is explicit in the Torah. Thus, it is completely irrational to require from us that every time we seem to be in a difficult predicament, we must trust that God will surely save and protect us in a way that the goodness of the outcome is clearly visible to us. Nonetheless, this is an attitude that it is incumbent upon us to embrace, regardless of its lack of rational basis. And this is why I try to follow this directive and trust God that he will do what is good for us as Jews and for us as Americans, and protect us from the shenanigans of the radical left, and ensure that Biden doesn't get to occupy the Oval Office. The sinister darkness of Joe Biden's soul did not take long to emerge. From the moment of his inauguration, he hastened to enact more executive orders than any president in American history. He basically declared war on the American people, the Jewish people, and on God himself. The American people, by taking away the livelihood of many thousands of Americans working in the energy industry, and by opening our borders to masses of illegal immigrants, which will inevitably bring in more crime and drugs to the detriment of our fellow citizens. On the Jews, by declaring through the active ambassador to the UN that he will be embracing the dangerous and false narrative of the Palestinians, whose ultimate goal is the eradication of the state of Israel. And this devout Catholic also declared war on God by facilitating that women all over the world can kill their unborn children for any stupid reason. And by declaring that God did not actually create men and women for the purpose of joining together in a loving marriage and producing God-fearing and upstanding children, as God explicitly states in the Bible. Rather, we are all genderless entities with no goal, no purpose, and no hope, who are free to use any bathroom we so desire or any locker room we so desire. And finally, this devout Catholic also trusts Trump's initiative to educate our children regarding the importance of the founding principles of our great country, namely, that the inalienable rights we all have to freedom and happiness were given to us by God. I think it should be quite clear now why, when faced with the possibility, no matter how remote, that God will keep Trump in the White House, I chose to put my trust in God that the outcome would be a good one, not only in the eyes of God, but a good one to our human eyes as well. In my next video, I will share with you what I understand to be the silver lining in the way things look at present. But I still have not given up hope that things may change in surprising ways. Until then, H-shem imochem. May God be with you.